Hi everyone! Thanks for coming out tonight on debate night. This is the better place to be in my opinion, to celebrate Meekling's excellent fall season. I'm Mandy, one of the co-owners and workers at Pilsen Community Books, which is a bookstore and worker cooperative in the beloved Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, which is also where Meekling is based. And I'm so excited to welcome Anne and Chelsea here tonight as the MCs for tonight's event and to hear a bit from Miriam, Willie, and Kate's new work. Before I turn things over to Anne and Chelsea, I wanted to mention that you can buy the readers' books on our website, pilsencommunitybooks.com. I encourage you to. They're really, really, really beautiful. And if you have any questions for any of the readers, feel free to drop them in the chat anytime during the event, and we'll read them out at the appropriate time. Don't be shy. All right, with that, I will turn it over to Chelsea. Oh, Chelsea, we think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Great. Really glad to kick off the show with not unmuting myself. Covered it. Now everyone's faces are covered for the rest of the show. Hey, everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to have you tuning in from whatever your internet box of choice is, especially on a night where there is obviously a lot of stuff going on. We're so excited to have you, mostly because this is our fall release party, and we are treating it like a party, which I hope is evident from me sitting in this beautiful space background and this beautiful gold jacket. We're here to celebrate the release of 3 fantastic works that we have put out on our imprint. And to tell you a little bit more about Meekling Press, if you're not familiar with us, we're a very small press located right here in Chicago, Illinois. You can find out more about what we do, which is mostly specializing in handmade editions of books by authors we absolutely adore at meeklingpress.com. So tonight we're going to be sitting and talking with and listening to and hearing from Kate Wyer, who is the author of Girl, Cow, and Monk. We're also going to be talking with Willy Smart, who's the author of Switch Wish, as well as Marream Krollos, who is the author of Stan. And with that, I'm going to kick it on over to Anne Yoder, who is the co-director of Meekling Press, who's going to introduce our fantastic readers.
Obviously inexperienced with the microphone as well. Hi all, thank you for coming tonight. It is so great to be here to release these 3 amazing books of fiction. I'm so excited to hear our readers read. We've been working on these books for the past year through the pandemic and are excited to just put something out into the world that has positive vibes. So with that, let's start with our first reader. First up, we have Miriam Crolos, author of Stan. And I don't think you can really see that through my, my St. Petersburg background kind of gets in the way. Miriam Krollos was born in Alexandria, Egypt. She has since lived in Los Angeles, New York, Seville, Seoul, Christchurch, and Riyadh. She received her PhD from the University of Denver. She previously lived in Jeddah, where she taught one of the very few creative writing classes in the kingdom. Her novel, Stan, has been called an exquisite and original cri de coeur by Jeffrey Deschel, and I would love to welcome Miriam to the reading.
Thank you. So I'm going to read from towards the end of the book where the voice becomes more disjointed in that she's not following any one strain, but she's connecting all the strains that have come before. So I will begin, and some of it, like I said, is going to seem fragmented, but hopefully it will work. Okay. One of my mother's friends died like my uncle. She used to tell me this story about a girl and the flowers that made her beautiful. Every time she came to visit, the girl was ugly until she gave the thirsty flowers water, even though she knew the mean witch she lived with would hurt her if she came back without any water. The sunflower made her tall and thin. The rose made her lips a pretty shade of red. The jasmine made her skin as milky as jasmine petals. I would beg her to tell me the story again and again. Every time she came to visit, I would ask her to tell me the story again, and she would agree to do so. She told it so well every single time, exactly the same way. Her face would change the same way every time, making the same expressions. Her voice would change the same way every time, rising and falling on the same words. There was once a girl who lived with a mean, hairy witch. The witch was so mean that the girl was always scared of her. The witch would always make her do all the chores around the house because all she wanted to do all day was comb her hairy body. She would always ask the girl to comb her hairy body for her. The girl would have to comb the witch for hours every day. One day the witch told the girl to go get some water. The girl took the bucket and went off to the well. This time, on her way back to the witch's house, she noticed that the sunflower was moving its head towards her. She was so startled. The sunflower lowered its head and said, "I am so thirsty. Won't you please give me some water? But the witch will be so angry with me if I don't come back with a full bucket of water," the girl said. "But I am so thirsty. Won't you please give me some water?" "All right, I will give you my water." The sunflower was so grateful it cried, thanked the girl, and suddenly she grew taller. My mother's friend had never been married. There must have been something wrong with her body that made her impossible to love. But I was young, I couldn't see it. So there we were, the young and the old girl, wishing we were beautiful. The young girl, the old girl, and the fairy tale from the desert, where water is scarce. We both knew why we were alone. We would not have given those flowers the water they wanted because we would have been too scared of the train. We would have been too scared of the mean witch. We did not give water to the people on the trains. We were too weak on the inside to ever be beautiful on the outside, even if we wanted to be. We should have posed for a portrait together, but we did not. We should have held each other and smiled at the painter because we were so happy to know what we are. Do you really want to be happy, though? Yes, God, I do. What happens once you are happy? Happiness, happiness, happiness is the great big whole. Maybe you want to simply want to be happy. Maybe you want to want to want to be happy. Want, after all, is a feeling you can have, to hold and to love and keep forever. Happiness is only a feeling for a day or two until you get used to it. You mean if I ever had Stan in my arms, there would be nothing else to want? Then I would have to feel something for the starving babies and their mothers and all the people who have been murdered and raped. Even if they had a Stan too, I would have a Stan and bread and a room, so I would have to be nice. This is just too much good for one person to have. You are right. I would have to feel happy all the time, and this is too hard. I cannot do that. To have to laugh at stupid jokes and paint pretty pictures all the time is just too hard. But I cannot live without the meaning of life, without knowing the meaning of life, so I will figure it out right now. First, we are born and we have bodies. We are told we will die and given different reasons for that. We are told about God, but we still have to work, so we have bread and a room. We lose the bread and the room and our bodies hurt. We cannot think or feel much when our bodies hurt. When our bodies hurt, we can only feel our bodies. It is good if your body does not hurt so you can be free to love. If you have food and shelter and you love people, then you are happy. Why are we ever happy if we are all meat that rots in the dirt? Well, because before that happens, you get to be good, and maybe you will go to heaven. What if there is no heaven? Then you just live to be happy for now. Why does happiness matter if we are nothing? Then we are something. Then we become dirt. Because there is maybe something you are doing right now that can make you happy. One alien says, if all the good ones are in heaven, that means there are zillions of them in heaven. By that time, we attack, it will be zillions and zillions of them. The other one says, but don't most of them go to hell? Aren't most of them bad? Yes, but even if only some of them go to heaven, then that is still zillions of them. Heaven must be a big place, bigger than the universe. Yes, it must be. Why do they think anything matters to them? Why do some of them care about the people on the trains? We think it is because they think they can change what happens on the earth. But even if they did change something right now, it would only be for a few minutes. It would change only so it could change back. They must have noticed how everybody goes back to killing once they stop the killing. Yes, once they stop themselves from killing each other in one place, they begin killing each other in another place. They live, then they die. And they don't really know why or what happens afterwards. How sad. Yes, how sad. That's it. This must be why they get so upset. When the aliens come to get us, I will be in a large building made of marble and stone. It will be dark blue and breezy indoors because of what the aliens have done to the weather. My skin will prickle and I will want to be tamped down. Everybody else will be running around in their suits and dresses. I will walk slowly past them all to try and find the aliens. I will make a turn into a stone hallway. I see one of them. We are all alone. He has gray skin and wisps of bright brown hair. He's much larger than I am, but I know somehow that he is just a baby. He is one of their children. He has only 2 eyes, but 5 mouths. The mouths are on top and next to each other, with the largest mouth in the middle, with 2 short tongues in each mouth. He comes closer to me. He does not love me, but he wants to know what I am. He does not know I am not beautiful. He is young. He cannot see it. He bends to lower me to the ground softly. He puts his mouth on my face. He is kissing me, but only to know me. There are tongues on my mouth and my nose and my chin and my cheeks. I want him to move his head down, but he doesn't. That is not how alien babies make love. I want what he is doing to make me come, but it will not. I cannot do anything now but lie there underneath him and pretend to love him. This makes me cry. This makes him want to shut me up. He begins to whisper in my ear, "Baby, you don't worry your pretty little head about it," he says. He has obviously already learned something about being a human man from touching a woman's face. He tells me what he thinks about the beauty of human blood, the rarity of its shade of red among all the shades of red in the universe. How they travel all over the universe just to see it. How when people make other people line up so they can shoot many people all at once, their blood gushes quickly as their bodies shudder, turning people into beautiful, bright, dancing fountains. He says this is not sad. It is beautiful. Thank you. That's all I needed to know. People kill people because blood is beautiful. I came and came beneath him. That
Thank you, Miriam. That was beautiful and melancholic and somber and wonderful. Next up, we have Willy Smart. Willie Smart was born in Idaho and is the author of numerous fantasies, insofar as one can claim to be the author of their own fantasies. Of Willie's Switch Wish, Joni Murphy has said, "Read this to be resensitized to the erotics of everyday life. Give it to your crush. They won't be able to pin down what you're suggesting, but they'll be enamored by the sensations these words transmit."
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks Pilsen Community Books for hosting and Meekling for facilitating everything. I'm in a tent in the backyard and it's very hot, so I hope that my computer doesn't get too hot, but it feels kind of appropriate too. Some water striders are moving over the surface of the water, the slicked over surface of the water. It casts out, moves as a mass in a slow slide through the eddy and into the channel. The eddy line is marked by bubbles and a little lip. The striders move like this too, at a different pace. Their organization keeps getting inconstant. A strider goes over the eddy line and then comes back. The strider switches sides. On the far side of the eddy line, the strider moves into a pause and is carried with the water's lean over the interval of the pause before contracting back. Prepositions are consequential parts of speech. On the near side of the eddy line, the strider moves into a pause too. An eddy circulation is lurchy. Its delineation plays out mostly under the water where I can't now see. The line's lip curves the light's lay. It's morning. A fantasy isn't something given or gathered. I don't forget and then feel its weight folded in my pocket. I don't flinch when my fingers rediscover its wetness contained by the crook of my pocket, despite the thinness of the fabric and the proximity of my thigh. I always forget how close my pocket rides me. A coin slips through the pocket's failure and draws a cold line down my thigh. A coin's metallic cling feels wet. A fantasy is a script, not an object. It gets run. It unfolds. I keep recalling the kissing scene in the 2002 film version of Spider-Man. He is suspended upside down, a body's height above the sidewalk, as she pulls down his mask from his chin, over his lips, but not so far as to reveal his eyes. It's raining. Either Spider-Man's supply of webbing is exhaustible or it isn't. I want to feel it either way. I want to feel my threaded discharge come to its limit, to feel myself spent. And I want to keep feeling droopy ropes, leaving me endlessly. Like the silk of non-human spiders, Spider-Man's webbing has a plain utility, catching bugs or wrongdoers. Spider-Man is paused right as he comes. I like him for his discharge, not his civic imperative. Real spiders don't govern. A spider's silk is clingy. I walk into it and it comes over my face. It's not sticky, it's soft. The plane of its network is laid over me. What clings isn't the silk matter. That can be brushed off easily enough. But the idea of its web. And the idea of a web includes the spaces defined by the threaded grid. That's its cling. I'd like to excrete something so soft, too. Spider-Man's superpower is the extension of his possibilities for binding. I'd like to get caught up in his web, not because I'm bad, but because I want to feel how soft it is. In the kissing scene with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, Spider-Man's silk is wet, like Kirsten Dunst's shirt. A wet t-shirt isn't erotic because it reveals something, but because it is going somewhere. It is becoming part of the environment. The t-shirt is becoming transparent and wet, like the air, like Tobey Maguire's tongue. Light falls on their tongues and is reflected into the camera's hold forever. Rain falls there, too. The difference between cinema and theater lies in the former's expanded environmental equity. A scene in a film can be like this, outside in the rain, where the actresses' performances are then secondary to the rain's. The actresses Toby and Kirsten are so luminous in this scene because they aren't acting. The rain is. All their trained efforts in sweat control are dropped for the scene's duration, as the rain does the drama of slicking and smearing. It's better to get wet than to make myself wet. Better to find a soft gloss laid over me than to spread it myself. A spider's discharge is called a thread because it links. It guarantees an association. A bind isn't an attachment, but an association. I like the association of this leaf of the huckleberry bush to this pine needle. A huckleberry bush can be recognized off-season by its leaves. They taste like the berry, but mildly bitter and drier. On an online forum devoted to reenactments of the kissing scene from Spider-Man, members post speculative photographs of the scene from the more appealing angle, just a spider's web studded with dew. A slow-motion video of a spider's thread warping and then pulling back into form under the periodic duress of rainfall. Always the web and the water, never the tongues or the t-shirts. This opens things up. It is very possible to take a walk in the woods just after dawn and come across a web beaded with water droplets in a way that conjures all the hot ambience of the scene without any of the extraneous acting. Insular online communities don't swerve entropic over time, but towards sublime subtlety. Currently, the forum is entirely non-textual. The interpretive import, namely that threads are materials with meanings themselves, has become perfectly implicit in plain images of wet webs. A spider is a popular fear because she, the spider, is so close to an ideal fantasy, holding a control over what holds me. It's a fantasy that can't end, because what gets discharged, what should allow the fantasy's winding down, is what supports the fantasy. I could just keep putting out webbing and keep getting held. Later, in the bathroom, my hand slips into the mirror's cool hold. No ripples on its surface as I enter, but around my wrist, as far as I now reach, the mirror is subtly contoured, accommodating my entry. That's the mirror's rim, only open and visible under special circumstances like this one. Erotic pleasure is about the rim, not the hollow, the lips, not the esophagus. The mirror isn't wet, more like lowering my hand into a bag of dry beans. Of course, a mirror is a portal, too. On the other side of the mirror, a current of summery air glosses my palm's backside. But I don't want to fully cross over, just to be at the crossing. I'm afraid to stick my head in. Plus, it's exciting not knowing who is watching and fanning my hand on the other side. The rim keeps changing places. It keeps receding. I pull my hand back and sniff my fingers. The mirror's mineral slickness smells like bubblegum. I keep returning to it throughout the day, taking my hand out of my pocket and discreetly smelling it. The fruity metallic note fades, though, and soon I lose track of which of my hands I'd used in the penetration. A mirror is uncanny not because it doubles me, but because its entry is oblique. I forget how I got in there. In the shower, this coalesces into furor. I'd prefer soap run into my eyes rather than shut them while I rinse my hair. It's hard to remember which passwords I've used for which sites. The inverse of a mirror's liquefaction is its shatter, which has an inverse effect, a curse rather than a permission. A curse doesn't set up specific effects. That's what a spell does, but enforces a set of conditions. Be home by midnight. A spell is called a spell because it unfolds sequentially, while a curse loops. In second grade, my name seemed propitious because its spelling encompasses another word, will, and thus the spell of this word will not be one I'm charged with memorizing. I'm exempt from will. While my eyes are closed, I work up a froth of soap into my hair. Soap gets in my eyes and makes me cry. Soap and fantasy both weep. Grammar is a great way to sustain attention, but ultimately the most realistic writing allows a slippage between agent and object. A soap bubble is great because it breaks, which isn't to say it's great because it ends. It doesn't. A fantasy keeps breaking, but not ending. Thanks.
Thank you, Willie. That was so hot. All the webs and wetness and thresholds. I saw a spider web, this beautifully wrought spider web on my divvy bike this morning, and I thought it was such a good omen for tonight's reading, thinking about Switch Wish. So thank you. And next up and last up, I would have to say, we have Kate Wyer. Kate Wyer is the author of the novels Black Crim and Land Beast. Her work has appeared in West Branch, The Rupture, Necessary Fiction, Hobart, Unsaid, and other journals. She works in the public mental health system of Maryland. She is also a somatics teacher and a registered yoga teacher. Of her book, Girl, Cow, and Monk, Kate Reed Petty has said, Kate Wyer's poetic elegiac fiction is a necessary salve for anyone who yearns for the disappearing natural world. Girl, Cow, and Monk is a captivating figurative portrait of the search for an authentic self. Everyone, Kate Wyer.
So hello, and thank you again to Pilsen Community Books for hosting. Thank you so much to Meekling for bringing this out into the world. Thank you to Willie and Miriam for their work tonight. It's so amazing to see all of our works in conversation with each other. So I am going to start with a segment. Girl and Cow is one novella and Monk is the second. So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning of both of them. So I'll start with Girl, Cow. Yesterday I combined the stars into a mass larger and brighter than the sun. Less than half a hemisphere, I told the sun when she was noon, when she was closest to reaching through me. Remember that, I told her. The cow's great pale body, sharp hips, long ears, sweet ankles. Could I have found a different one, an older one who knew how to be milked? What choice was there when my mind said now? I see schools of sardines sleeping in shallows. Their bodies hang, not touching, swaying as if on a mobile. Light builds, fish stir. They begin their elongated swim, the sun barely catching their scales. Huge tunas and barracudas know our shadows, our limbs, and the points of our spears. I look back and take in the pine trees, the wide spaces between them. I see all the way to the houses, to the dark shapes of them. White egrets sleep in high nests, their mating plumage long, wispy from their chests. The fishermen should be finishing the last of their bitter root coffee and whatever egg or smoked fish they saved for breakfast. Come, cow, I say to her, I need a name for you. Samira, I tell her, you'll be Samira. She resists at the water's edge. She blinks her dark eyes, pulls her head back to look longingly toward her pen, her son. My head comes to her shoulder. Samira takes some of my long brown hair into her mouth and chews. I let her. The night before I left, I said a prayer to the sea to bring me good dreams. Let me know something of the next months, I said. Let me know something of the coming year. I prepared my bed, made a circle of flour around me. The sea did not tell me anything. I did not dream. We lift our feet from the shore and swim. Samira's good at it, even though she's never done it before. I let her pull me along on the rope until she gets tired. Then I pull her the rest of the way out to the sandbar. Her body glows under the water as the sun rises. Beds of kelp are in front of us. I see their arms moving and the furred texture of the water, the bladders and racks like so much webbing. She wades into the seaweed like it's a chest-high pasture. The fishermen bring this in for her to eat, so she buries her nose into the dark green, then pulls up a thick mouthful. She tries to chew as water leaves and rivers from her teeth. Samira relaxes into a cud. The kelp will keep me for a day, I think. After that, I will drink her milk. I have a compass and a sailor's waxed map. There are saltwater filters in our bodies, the bodies of my ancestors, from decades of sea living. All that is different about our bodies to the eye is a slight pouch of the belly, the slight bloat of water made brackish in our guts. The cow pulls me some, I pull the cow some. We walk this way, if you call it walking. The easy shelf is gone. We wander the sandbar next to the deep pit of cliffs and caverns. To our right, it's now impossible to see the ocean's floor. Cow cursing, water hating, rope hanging, eye burning, sun splicing, south walking. I'm quick to forget how solid land feels, and even to forget the feeling of air on my legs, how to carry my own weight, what it is like to sit, cross-legged or otherwise, on something that supports me. The water cools off the shelf, and fear is cold too. No one ever said we would be safe out here. They just said we wouldn't drown. So I'm going to read from the beginning of Monk. So I wrote this book at the very end of 2013 and revised it for quite some time. There is a word that with this current world that we live in now that I thought about changing and editing because it carries so much different weight now, but it is still a lovely word, and I prefer it over halo. So Corona is here, but just imagine a halo and not a pandemic, please. So, Monk. The star-shaped one, the triangle, the precise spokes of another, the basic circle, the quatrefoil. And my favorite, the corona Anthony seldom removes, the crescent tight around the bald dome of his skull, the corona that is almost blue instead of golden, blue in the way of glaciers, both blue and not, both colorless and skyful. It is smallest, but it illuminates the hollows under his dark eyes, catches the white hairs in his eyebrows, glides down the slope of his nose, and shadows the philtrum before curving light over his bottom lip. His light brings my eyes up from the tilled rows of the garden, or from the neat lines of our prayers, brings my eyes up to meet his, which are also raised instead of humbled. His eyes assess me coolly before he returns to peeling beets, his hands bleeding purple-red around skinned globes. Anthony wounds the largest cedar, the one just outside the clay walls of his monastery. His peeling knife flicks at the knobby bark, not deep, but enough to bring resins, the tree's way of healing itself, to the surface. He keeps watch over our pharmacy, dispenses small balls of the sticky red resin when someone is sickened. When placed in warm water, it dissolves into a fragrant tea that speaks to the offending pith inside a body, speaks to it and sends it on. His personal garden is small and filled with skullcap and lemon balm, tonics for nerves. I wonder if the light his body emits is fed by these herbs, or if they feed only the part the light does not know, like the back of his earlobe dusted with loam after a distracted hand brushed away a fly. What does the light know of how I want to reach and make that skin clean? I hear the men walking in step behind me. The eldest swats me on the nape of my neck with his robe's tassel. It stings, and I am back. Silence means the click of thumbnail against wooden rosary, the turning of thin pages, the crack of old knees genuflecting, the scrape of metal spoon against ceramic bowl, the shuffle, the limp, the hustle of ambulation, cough, sneezes, sniffles. Silence means the wet hesitation of resistance a potato makes with each pass of the knife, the dry rip of collard greens removed from their stalk. It is hearing a throat swallowing milk, a throat swallowing tea, the dry sockets of teeth chewing bread. It is hearing the air around hands as they perform rituals, as all men move in the same pattern, a touch to the forehead, to the heart, to the shoulders, as hands come together to touch palms. Silence means hearing the fabric around our bodies, the swish of robes. It is the strike of a match and the fizz of flame catching, of breath ending flame before it reaches fingers, the moon-fed movements of the ocean and its response through the cedars, the falling of those cedars' needles and the thump of the cones, and always the tss of straw brooms cleaning some corner, some hallway. Silence means hearing bodies turning in narrow beds, the scrabble of mice feet, and the mooted whoosh of a raptor. This silence meant I was not alone.
Thank you, Kate. That was beautiful. Yeah. So I guess we will now move on to the question and answer portion of this segment. And I just wanted to ask people to send your questions or start thinking of questions if you have any from these readings. And Chelsea and I have some questions that we've thought of to ask. I've been working with these authors for the past year or so, and so I feel like I've spent a lot of time with their words, and I love them actually the more I listen to them and read them. I wanted to start with a question for Kate and Miriam, because I know that you both have trained as poets and are publishing books of fiction. So I just wanted to ask you about the way that your background as poets influences your process and your approach to writing fiction.
Do you want to go ahead first?
Sure. So all of my work starts with an image. So I think in that way, I definitely draw on my background studying poetry. And, I've written a full-length novel, but my work since then has really, I'll write a lot and then I will just cut, over half of it. I'll just pare down as much as I can so that the images are as sharp and focused as possible, and that I'm paying attention to not only the image, but the way that it sounds and the way that it's placed on the page to allow a lot of white space to sort of slow things down and let that image really simmer. So that's how I see my poetry background informing my current work.
So for me, it happened at first accidentally. I started out as a poet because, like Kate said, I was focused on the image, the one image that would carry the verse. And then it happened accidentally in that during my MFA, it just wasn't working. The MFA wasn't working in terms of it being poetry, like just with advisors and et cetera, et cetera. So I decided that I would, since I was getting more positive reaction from the drama and fiction professors, just be a fiction writer. And what happened, it turned out that I just was a fiction writer, that's why the MFA wasn't working as poetry. But I do actually have a poetry volume that is the basis of Stan. Stan starts out as a poetry volume that is published, but there was something about what was going on during the program that just wasn't working as well when I was doing verse. And when I put that poetry volume, when I turned it to prose, which is what Stan is, there was just more energy. Like I was more original, quote unquote. Like I had a stronger voice when I wasn't broken into lines. And it was an accident, because I think if I'd had different advisors from the beginning with poetry, I might not have ever realized that. But it just happened the way it happened. Like I wasn't getting the advising I needed from being a poet, and the fiction writers were being more supportive. And so I realized that I actually just have more of a voice. I have more force when I don't break myself into lines, though I do still do it within fiction. So within Stan, I do occasionally break prose. And in another book, Big City, I do occasionally, like if I feel like it needs to be broken, I do break prose into verse. But for me, that's how it happened. I needed the support of a fiction writer. And then I saw that when I didn't break my work into lines, I just had more force. I had more voice for some reason. Like it was just intrinsically how I needed to write.
It seems like a fortunate accident. I mean, having read Stan, at least from that perspective. But I mean, the poetics of your language, I feel really are so present, almost like a character, and or just moving the books forward in both of your works. I guess in thinking about that and these transitions, for a question for Willie is that I was intrigued from the beginning about the idea of Switch Wish being a novel in disguise. Switch Wish is an erotic novel disguised as a nature novel, as I'm sure you've surmised from Willie's reading. So I wanted to hear more about, I guess, just what inspired you to write that, the erotics of nature in the novel, and also of the disguise itself. What influenced you to write a novel in disguise?
Yeah, well, thinking back to these last couple answers about the, I guess, specific affordances of prose, I think my answer is going to be kind of similar, that I think one of the things I was thinking about as I started this project was the form of the erotic novel and what the erotic novel can do, which I think has to be prose. Like, I'm sure we could maybe think of some examples of erotic poetry, but I don't think it can do erotics in the same way that prose can. I think that a novel kind of carries you in a different way with the voice and the image than the visuality of poetry is able to do. And so thinking about the erotic novel formally, I think for me raised the question of whether it would be possible to write an erotic novel that was erotic, that didn't have any sex in it or any, I guess, human sex. And so thinking about different kinds of scenes, touching and interfacing with different kinds of bodies. And I think that led me to, nature writing and the preoccupation in nature writing with descriptions of landscapes, descriptions of the body's relation to landscapes, which seems to me like intrinsically erotic. Like reading Annie Dillard, which was a big inspiration for this book, I think her work is really intensely erotic, even though she's not, I don't think, writing deliberately in that way, but she's describing these kind of alien bodies and these alien forms and intimate relations to them. And so, it seemed to me like suggesting that and nature writing was erotic wasn't something new for me. I think nature writing is often, or is always, erotic, and yeah, just wanted to try to push it into that frame a little bit more deliberately.
I would love to jump in here because I really appreciate how that sort of tied into what Miriam and Kate have both talked about here as well. So kind of, I would love to be able to pose this to all three of you. Willie, I love that you mentioned the idea that a novel carries you in a different way than poetry would, and that has sort of a necessary relationship to carrying eroticism in some capacity. Because, you know, I think about the very, very beginning of Switch Wish and the point at which the narrator is mentioning, I want to shepherd attention rather than receive it resolved, right? And at the end of that first section, talking about the relationship with the stop eject button on a cassette player, right? Like the idea that it's mandatory that the script must be flipped. And so I think in all three of these works, something that I noticed was this idea of both this feeling of tension and also this idea of the necessary of that flip, of that switch, that seems to carry each of these prose works in a way that I found so much more engaging than a lot of other stuff that I've been reading right now, because it's something that in its own way, we're talking about how things both are enveloped and also how the thing that has been enveloped changes the nature of the envelope in some capacity. And this is something that I think about, you know, Kate, with the scene in which the narrator in Girl Cow is talking about her dad drumming and sort of the change that happens with her as the centipede moves over her legs, and suddenly the possibility of herself, of also seeing her father in that moment, have radically changed. That this is something, the tension I think about between taking life and making life, that kind of tension, as well as the I and the you tension and Stan, and something that's really endemic, I think, specifically to Switch Wish. I would love to hear each of you maybe talk about whether or not that tension or that immersion, that surrounding, was something that you were thinking about in producing each of these works, because I think it's something that creates a really unique kind of narrative that's way more engaging and envelops the reader much more at a time like now when at least for me personally, I've had trouble kind of latching on or becoming long-term interested in books with maybe a more straightforward narrative per se.
So maybe I'll begin just to begin. So in terms of narrative with Stan, I feel that there's some type of golden rule that sometimes writers don't understand they're applying to their work. Like, you know, you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And like you said, Chelsea, I have a really hard time reading books that are based on plot, where the narrative is more focused on like the event. And it's because of television and theater and movies. It's because of like decades of knowing how plot functions. So I feel that now what language has to do is still be new, despite TV, despite television, despite theater, despite like centuries of all the other forms of media. Language still has to do something that the reader doesn't expect, and it's difficult. But as a reader, I can't focus on plot after having watched a million movies now at the age of like middle-aged myself, right? So like, I don't expect my readers to just like have to go through with me a plot and a story for no other reason than that they're going to get a story when they can get it in 9 other different ways that day than my book. So I want to give them something. In the fiction books I have published, Stan and Big City, that are considered fiction, I just want to like give them a way to understand language that just hasn't been done for them that day. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Willie, do you want to go next? Or?
You can jump in if you want.
Okay. So as you were talking, I was thinking, I don't have all that much formal education in fiction writing. I have taken classes and I have had great teachers, great fiction teachers. So there's a whole lot that I actually don't know, but I know this idea of like what's at stake, is really big in so much fiction writing. But I think for me, what's at stake is always just the interior experience of the person. And that's really what drives all of my writing, is just trying to step into that consciousness and to see, just what is it like to be this person? Or, I wrote as a rhino. What is it like to be this grieving rhino that's been brutalized? So, but that's really the thing that drives my work more than, at formal plot, is really just the way that I guess, trauma changes us, experience changes us, and how do we evolve? How do we flip or switch or change or adapt, and what is the interior experience of that?
Yeah, I don't totally know what to add other than I guess saying I think deferral and tension are intrinsic to erotic experience. I think that's what erotic experience is all about, is building up a tension that you want to release, but you also don't want to release, because once the energy is released, once things are finished, then the experience is over. And I think, yeah, that sort of tension, trying to maintain that tension, trying to sort of edge against it, was something that I was trying to have the language perform in this book, to keep kind of bringing us up to some point, and then looking backwards and flipping around a different direction, and yeah.
I think that's something I really appreciate at a time like now, because that feeling of like, Willie, from your work, pausing in order to, I want to come back to this thing that is good, I want to maintain existing in this energy, is I think absolutely something that happens in all three of your works, and is something that, as someone who is much more of a newcomer to them than Anne is, like, found myself enjoying each of these works so much that I'm so excited to continue to return to them, even after my initial forays into them. So yeah, I appreciate that. I think they're all doing a wonderful job of creating that pause.
That's so lovely. I mean, just thinking about the tension and return is really just how Switch Wish builds its narrative. I wanted to ask Mandy if there are any questions. No one has. Okay.
I mean, that's all right by me. Anne, I don't know if you have anything else you immediately want to ask. Otherwise, I definitely can post.
I did want to ask Miriam. I mean, and this, well, yeah, I guess I wanted to ask a general question about nature, and it's like one thing I realized with all of these, with the books, especially Kate's and Willie's, is how they align with nature and just from the natural perspective, which wasn't something that I had realized when we had selected the books. So I was curious to ask you to talk about how, I guess, just how nature influences your work. And that's a very broad question. So I guess specifically, I know that Kate has written a few books that deal with the natural world, and they're so embodied, and that Willie's work is very anchored to the natural world as well. So maybe just hearing you talk a little bit about that. And then Miriam, I'm curious about somewhat similar, but I mean, it's like a resonance of that is just about the narrator in the book reminding herself that people are animals, and the disconnect between the people, like just kind of the Anthropocene, or I mean, and maybe more the mentality of that, and just like the physicality, like that's really present too. I'd love to hear you just riff on that in whatever way you want to.
So I think most of my work, there are 3 books that are out. Like I said, one is a poetry volume that then becomes Stan. But most of it is about the human body in solitude. So it turns out that when I consider the human body in solitude, it is an animal body. So it is the body of, a pig, or, a cow or a spider, or any other creature that exists that is not human. And so that's predominantly how nature functions in my work, is that the bodies, the voices are human bodies alone. And when I speak, like Kate said, through an interior, using those bodies in solitude as voices, it turns out that that's what they have to say, is that they are animals. So it just kind of happens naturally for me. And then it does become like more sometimes, like in Stan, when you consider like what you kill and what you keep alive. And why, if then the voice sees that it is just an animal body, it has a right to live or think differently than the pig. Was that confusing? But I think the answer is that I write voices. Sometimes, like in Big City, in that book, that's a story collection, and there are real stories that have third-person narratives, but most of the time I write voices, and all my voices are alone. Like I just wouldn't even know what to do with like a character that had like a loving wife, or like I wouldn't even know what to do with that. So like, because my voices live in the solitude of their physical flesh, they somehow, again, like what Kate said, like when I live in that interior, it just happens naturally. I end up having to create the imagery of like dying wolves and beheaded pigs. And so it goes from there. It begins with just like lonely people, it turns into like butchered animals, and from there, so on and so forth. But yes, that's how nature plays into it, I think. Sorry if that was weird. Are you guys still there?
I mean, I don't think it was weird at all. I think that was, yeah, I mean, I find that to be just something that I'm very drawn to in the book, and it makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if Willie or Kate have answers, or if that was just too broad of a question, because there is, I mean, your books are just so embedded within the natural world that, like it is broad, but
I can speak to that, I think. I think I would say that in Switch Wish, the nature that is present is always in quotation marks. It's, I think, which is why I was saying earlier, nature writing is a big reference point for me in the book, rather than nature itself. All of the descriptions of, I guess, nature are things from my head. They're like memories, or they're, fantasies of things that could happen in nature. But there's no like plein air element, of going into the woods and trying to write there. And as I was writing it, I did get in contact with an entomologist who studies water striders, because it seemed like it might be helpful to talk to an expert. But I think the material specificity of that kind of knowledge actually felt counter to what I was interested in here, which was more the way we imagine nature, the way we get turned on by nature, the way we imagine certain things happening there. So so the nature that appears is, I think, always this imagination of nature, rather than a realistic nature.
Yeah, it has so much energy. That makes so much sense. I mean, there's so many resonances of nature, and the water striders, and just, I mean, basically anything that is present. Yeah, that's great. If you have anything to say, Kate,
Sure. Yeah, I guess I would just add, when people read my work, the word grief usually comes up in relation to the natural world. And I think that that's a really interesting experience, and it is true. It is there. Grieving this world, this planet that we're, destroying. But when I'm writing from a place of deep resonance, almost like a religious attention to experience again. I mean, that is just how I experience hiking. It's how I experience going to the beach. I mean, just, the types of environments that are in Girl, Cow, and Monk are very dear to me. And I just love to slow down and observe and be in those places that are not as touched by civilization, and just get to observe, like the crabs, or whatever, the skate egg sacs and things like that. So, I'm writing from a place of reverence.
No, thank you so much for being willing to get together and share all of this with us this evening. It's been immersive. It's been sumptuous. It's been wonderful to hear and see all of you. I think we're probably about at a point where we kind of need to wrap up, I think, unfortunately. So I want to say thank you again to all three of our fantastic writers that we have here tonight: Miriam Crolos, Kate Wyer, and Willy Smart. I also want to say huge thank you to Mandy and Pilsen Community Books for fantastically setting this up. Mandy, is there anything else you want to make sure that we mention here before we go? If you are looking for any of these titles, you can go to pilsencommunitybooks.com. You can get all those things shipped to you. Any other stuff that we would love to have you mention right now, have people check out?
No, that's great. I wanted to mention that there were no questions, but there's lots of love in the chat. So that's really nice to hear people saying, I don't have a question, but this is great. This is so exciting. Thanks for sharing. Lots of hearts. So I think everyone really enjoyed this tonight. Thank you for putting it together.
Oh, wonderful. And thank you, like I said, thank you so much to y'all for being willing to host and help with that. If you want to see more amazing, fantastic programming, like I said, you can go to pilsencommunitybooks.com. They have a very comprehensive events page with lots of fantastic programming going on, which is absolutely just a wonderful and welcome thing during this time when all of us are at home and looking for ways to immerse ourselves. You can do that with these three fantastic novels that we have: Willy Smart's Switch Wish, Miriam Krollos' Stan, and Kate Wyer's Girl, Cow, and Monk. All of those are out on our imprint, Meekling Press. You can see more about us at meeklingpress.com. We've got a full catalog of stuff that is available there. There's also a bunch of information about our own upcoming events. We do have a series of wild and woolly fictional lectures that we are doing as a distance learning term this year called Meekling Talks. So we are focusing on various modes of conveying educational information to people, which is a little bit different than we normally do them. The show that we have coming up they're always on the second Tuesdays of each month. So our second show of our fall term will be on October 13th at 7 p.m. It'll be online. We'll have all that stuff posted. And our theme is the infomercial. So if that sounds exciting, engaging, and wild to you, we promise you, we assure you that it will be. Anne, is there anything else that you want us to mention here before we let these folks get on about their evening?
No, just thank you all for this wonderful event, Mandy, Kate, Miriam, Willie. It was great.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you for
Bye.
tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.